What's up, Alan? Welcome to the Dad Edge, my friend.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we put it on the calendar.
Me too, man. Me too. Hey, anything that we can title sustain your game? I mean, that resonates with every father out there.
Well, yeah, I think it's something that resonates almost with every human being walking the planet, but absolutely as fathers. I have 12-year-old twin sons and a 10-year-old daughter. So they're kind of in that mid stretch now where they're starting to blossom into actual real people and real human beings. And we have some amazing conversations. And while I'll certainly never be a completed work and put under museum glass as a father, I'll always be looking for improvement. But I'm at that stage now where my goal is to sustain performance and excellence and fulfillment, so that I can be the best version of myself for my children, at this current stage in their life. So yeah, anything and everything that has to do with sustaining performance and fulfillment, I'm all about.
Well, I need your sustain your game energy today because as you and I talked before I hit record today, I told you I'm working on about 3 hours and 20 minutes of sleep. Been up since about 3:20 this morning. My wife, unfortunately, was not feeling so good, so she was coughing and she coughed. I woke up, I couldn't go back to sleep. So I'm drinking a little bit of caffeine, but your energy is contagious, my friend, and I'm going to bring it right back at you. So I'm excited to do this. But real quick, I'm going to share a statistic with you that a former podcast guest, I don't know if you know him, Todd Herman. He is the best-selling author of, you know him? Yeah, all right, yeah.
Love Todd.
I do too. I don't know where he got this quote from, if he did his own research. He didn't say it was his quote, but I'll never forget it. I interviewed Todd probably 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. And he said 80% of our one-on-one time is gone with our kids is gone by the time they're 12. And you've got 12-year-old twins. And when he said that, like, I just remember like my heart like kind of sank and I'm like, holy crap. And I was like, well, why is that? And he said, well, think about it. He's like, they're preteen, usually that's time they kind of get a phone, they get their circle of friends, they're going out, they're doing this, they're spending the night at other friends' houses, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely accurate. I've got a 16, 14, 8, and 6. And yeah, the 14 and 16-year-old, it is absolutely true, my friend. Are you seeing that yourself at all yet?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, you
I
are? Okay.
yeah, borderline smiling and shedding a tear as you were reading that
Right.
statistic. Now, for context for your listeners, I'm very amicably divorced. So I was married for 5 years and I've been divorced for 7. And thankfully, my ex and I are pretty good friends and we make excellent co-parents. So my parenting time is already somewhat compartmentalized. I mean, I have my kids about half the time. So I've always had to be incredibly intentional and present with my kids when I have them because I don't have the luxury of having them all of the time. And, I think that's both a blessing and a curse, depending on how you want to look at it. But even as recent, of recent in the last year or two, the kids choose to spend the night at my place a lot less often. Like their home base is with their mom. That's where they've got their rooms and their laptops and their gaming systems and all that kind of stuff. They just feel more comfortable there. We live about 15 minutes apart. So, their friends and their schools and everything are closer there. So I've noticed just even in the last year and a half, as much time as we spend together, the kids still prefer to spend the night, at my ex's house. And that's already cut into some of the time, individual time that we would have together. So as true as that statistic is, what I'm choosing to do is really be as intentional and present and focused on that 20% that I'm hoping I still have left in the holster, and just making the most of the time that I do have and not getting too hung up on quantity of time, but really trying to heighten quality of time. And, that's by no means easy to do. I know every dad listening to this right now probably feels the challenge and struggle in doing that.
Oh yeah. It's, I've had so many guests come on and share that exact same sentiment. It's not necessarily, I mean, listen, kids spell LOVETIME.
Yes, they do.
But don't let that confuse with quantity. So like when guys, so I have one-on-one clients, we also have a huge mastermind group called Dad Edge Alliance. And when men come and join us, one of the things that they say, we say, what do you want? What do you want to achieve? What are your 12-month outcomes? What's most important and meaningful to you? Right. A lot of guys say, I want more time. And to be honest, we challenge with them with that a little bit. Well, we're like, well, that's great. If you had more time, what would you do with it? Or do you want better time? Because there is a difference, right? We can spend 3 hours in front of Netflix sitting next to each other and sharing space, Or could we share 20 minutes and have a high level connected conversation with our kids that's meaningful, right? And it provides memories and connection and psychological safety and all that good stuff, right?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you went in that direction. And these are all the things that I think we're all juggling all of the time. And you know, I say in full transparency, whether we're talking about something as specific as the craft of being a father, or we're talking about any other area of life, I'm not speaking from a place of mastery on any of this stuff. Like, I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. I've put certain principles and lessons into practice over the last several years that have given me a very high return and have put me on a better path. So I love the path that I'm on, but we're all struggling with this. And I think that's one of the most important parts. And one of the things I most respect and admire about what you do is just making sure that every dad out there knows you're not alone. You know, whatever it is you're going through right now, whatever struggles and adversities and challenges you're feeling, you're not alone, that we're all feeling this to some degree. And it's so wonderful to create a community where we can bond together to help lift each other up and help share best practices and help share strategies and say, hey, you know, here's a landmine I stepped on a couple of days ago. I want to share it with you so you don't step on it as well. Or here's something I've worked, you know, I've put into practice that's worked really well, that maybe you'd find benefit from, you know, too. And I think I've always lived by the mantra that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And, you know, helping people light candles, especially in fatherhood, is something very, very important to me.
I agree. I totally agree with you. And I want to share something that is like very humbling. It's a story, but before I do that, I'm going to throw a question out for you to think about while I just share this story.
Okay.
And we're going to get right to the question. So you've got this incredible book called Sustain Your Game. And when it comes to fatherhood, when it comes to husbandry or husbandhood or whatever we want to call it, or manhood, sustaining our game in this season, when you are juggling marriage, when you're juggling fatherhood, when you're juggling work and fitness and physical, mental, emotional health, maybe perhaps your faith, all of these things, your finances that just grab our attention. It's very hard, you know, for us to sustain our game. So I'm really intrigued to really dive into a few strategies with you. So I want you to be thinking, obviously, I want to know, the first question I have for you is, how did this book come about? And you have worked with some amazing people in the past who are operating at a very high professional level. I want you to tell us some stories around them as well. But while you gel on that question, I'll share this with you. I'm an idiot when it comes to fatherhood. And you talk about the most ridiculous imposter syndrome known to man. Like it's ridiculous, you know. So like last night, I try to be, I have 4 boys, which is like living in a fraternity house with everyone drunk that you never leave. And there's just constant chaos and messes. And there are things that end up in places where I'm just like, I'm not kidding. This was a few months ago. There was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich half eaten on the sink of the bathroom. And like, you know how you look at something and you're like, I know what that is, but I don't think it's supposed to be here. And then you're like, do a double take and you're like, yeah, that is what I thought it was. And then you start thinking like, how did that even get here? Right. So there's that. But so last night, that's fresh off the press, Mason, I'm sorry, I already apologized to you, but my 14-year-old, he left some trash, like a Lunchable tray and his Gatorade bottles. And I was in just one of those kind of foul states where like the house is a mad chaos. And I looked at him and I was like, dude, I am so sick and tired of telling you, pick up your trash, man. This living room is not your trash can. All right. Pick it up. He's like, Dad, he goes, I literally just said it there a second ago. I'm like, I don't care. I am so tired. And he looked at me and he goes, why do you have to yell at me? Why do you have to yell at me? He's like, if you ask me nicely, like, I'll do it. And then my ego stepped in. I'm like, well, if you did it, I wouldn't have to ask. And he's like, yeah, but you're on my case a lot. And he just sort of looked at me as a matter of fact. And for like a split second, my 14-year-old turned into a 30-year-old. And I was very humbled. And I was like, fuck, man, I was like, oh my God, he's right. Like, he's totally right. And so I took a moment and I was like, God, he's really right. Like, what am I teaching him? Blow up at him? Like, that's what he's going to do to his own kids? Or can I ask nicely once? And then if he doesn't do it, then maybe get a little bit more stern. So I apologized to him. I said, you know what? I came back to him later that night and I was like, I'm really sorry. You're absolutely right. I was like, let's make an agreement. If I see your trash and stuff like that, I will ask you nicely. You know, I will do my part. Can you do your part and try to pick up after yourself more often? And he's like, yeah, I can definitely do that. And I was like, listen, man, I'm sorry. I was like, as much as you're trying to figure out how to be 14 and navigate into your first freshman year of high school, I'm still trying to figure out how to be 46 and raise 4 boys. And some days I get it right. And some days I fall flat on my face. And today was one of them. And he just hugged me. He goes, it's all right, man. You know, I get it. So yeah, man, it's like, we have these moments where it's just like, we fall on our face, have to get back up. Maybe I should have interviewed you yesterday. I might've needed some sustain your game yesterday. But anyway, back to the question. I want to know how this book came about. And I want you to talk about some of the high level people you've worked with in the past.
Well, I would love to do that. But before we do that, we got to address what a beautiful sentiment with what you just shared. I mean, certainly as a fellow 46-year-old father, I applaud your courage and vulnerability in sharing maybe not one of your best moments and something that you learned from it. And I'm glad that you did learn from it. You mentioned the word humility a couple of times. And I think that's one of the most important traits for any of us to continue to heighten and work on in any area of our life, because it's humility that allows us to stay open to feedback. Humility allows us to stay open to coaching and all of the wonderful stuff that you share at the Dad's Edge. Humility is what reminds us that even on the days when we're in a groove and we're the best dad ever, we can still get better. And none of us have this mastered. We're still going to try and figure this out. And I think what a beautiful moment, great teaching moment for you and your son. You know, I was starting to smile because I've had this talk with coaches and executives before, and I know you'll take this with the warmth and spirit that it's offered. I used to say as a coach all the time, like, you know, I've told you 1,000 times, I need you to box out. And then it dawned on me, if I've told someone something 1,000 times and they're still not doing it, the failure is on me. It's not on them. I need to find a better way to communicate that, because clearly if I've told you 1,000 times and you're still not doing it, the message is not being received. And I learned very early in coaching, it's not what you say, it's what they hear. That's all that matters. And what they hear is coming through a very biased lens, a filter, if you will. So if we're saying the same thing over and over and we're not getting this response that we want, we need to change what we're saying, or change how we're saying it, or change the approach. So I think you brilliantly and beautifully kind of learned that lesson, is like, hey, I've told you 10 times and I'm telling you with a very high volume as I'm yelling at you, and yet you still continue to leave trash around. Maybe I need to try a different approach. And that takes tremendous humility. So I really commend you for doing that. And I commend him for, as a 14-year-old, having the maturity of a 30-year-old to be able to meet you in the middle. And I know you also kind of unconsciously brought up something that I believe in parenting, that anytime you can make something more of an agreement and less of a, you know, leading from the ivory tower, you know, parenting should not be a dictatorship. It should not be just because I'm older and because I'm your father, I set the rules and you follow them or else. You know, that's leading and parenting and coaching through fear. And it's incredibly ineffective. You know, for any of us to heighten buy-in and believe in from our children, regardless of age, they need to have some ownership. You know, they need to be able to help navigate where they're going. They should be able to share their preferences and set some of the rules. And at the same time, help co-create and collaborate on being held accountable. And you know, what are the ramifications or punishments going to be, or consequences, if you don't live up to your agreement, and so forth. And that's why I love the work that I get to do, because all of this directly applies in the basketball coaching and training space, absolutely applies in the executive and sales and corporate space, but it works in parenting beautifully. And I think you had a wonderful moment. I'm glad that you shared that. Clearly you live by the mantra of a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle as well. So thank you so much.
No, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, it's funny as you were saying that. So you're saying because I said so doesn't work. And it's really funny. We say that in parenting, well, because I said so. But would we say that to a client? No.
Oh.
Just go do this thing. Why? Because I said so. Like, we would never do that, but we do that in parenting. But anyway, yeah. But so back to your book and back to some of the amazing people that you've had the honor of working with. This has been a really cool evolution for you, and I want you to talk about it.
Be happy to. Well, two things to set context. One, I write books based on what it is that I'm going through in my own life. So in other words, I write the book that I need to read. If I'm feeling challenged with sustaining my own game, then that's the book I'm going to write, because the research and the curation of stories is very therapeutic for me. And then I know that whatever it is that I'm going through in my life, I'm not the only one. So that if I'm struggling with things like stress, stagnation, and burnout, there's a good chance other people are as well. So this work that I'm doing when research and writing the book is certainly a focal point for me, but it's done in full service of others. It's done to give other people, the strategies and the lessons that I learned through that writing process. So that's a big part of it. And also to put in context just on my journey. So I spent 15 years as a basketball performance coach. And in that time, I got two very distinct vantage points of high performance. One, I worked mostly at the high school level, and I worked at two high schools here in the Washington, D.C. area that have produced over a dozen players currently in the NBA, the most notable of which is Kevin Durant. So I got to meet these kids when they were 14, 15 years old and watch what they needed to do and help guide them to optimize their performance to reach that proverbial mountaintop. That ended up leading to work with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. Then I got an opportunity to work events for guys like Kobe Bryant, and LeBron James, and Stephen Curry, and Steve Nash. I got to see guys that had already reached the mountaintop and observe them and what they needed to do to stay there, what they needed to do to continue to refine mastery of their craft, but also stay atop and perform at a high level with a high level of fulfillment as well. So I've gotten to see both sides of the curtain, and really those at present, that's the impetus for each book. Raise your game is what it takes to reach optimal performance. Sustain your game is what it takes to stay there. And while I was unpacking what it takes to sustain excellence in any area of life, even fatherhood, I found that the three biggest things that undermine that were stress, stagnation, and burnout. And those really hit home for me because I've experienced all three of those at various times in my life, and have finally been put on a path where I've got some strategies to manage each of those. And doing so has allowed me to not only continue to sustain performance, but incrementally continue to level up as well.
It's funny. So you said stagnation, burnout, and what was the other one?
Stress.
Have you found, is there an order to any of those that happen?
We're juggling all three, and we're toggling in and out of all three at all times in our life. I mean, there's no question. But I do, as far as timing is concerned, I found that stress appears more in the day-to-day. It's in our daily lives, like the conversation you had with your son yesterday, and even how that stress can be heightened by your wife coughing last night and waking you up at 3:23 in the morning. So stress is kind of in the day-to-day. Stagnation is kind of that midterm, where we reach a certain level of performance and we unconsciously put on the mental cruise control and just say, you know what, good is good enough. I think I've got this parenting thing down. I'm a pretty good father. The last couple of weeks and months, I've done really good. I'm cool. And you just kind of let that ride out. And it's a very numb feeling. And then burnout is more long-term thinking. And it's more of when the accumulation of the sacrifices you make and the hours you put into your work or into fatherhood, you no longer find meaning in. Like, you don't feel a purpose in what you're doing. You don't feel like you're making a contribution, and you let yourself kind of weather away. I mean, I think one of the biggest struggles that every father on the planet feels is this tug of war between self-care and filling your bucket first so that you can be the best father for your children. Because we often feel as fathers, we should always be of service, almost like we're on call. We're always filling everybody else's bucket, whether that's your significant other or your children or your colleagues and coworkers. We're always giving, and it's very easy to let our own cup get completely empty. But when you do that, then you're of no good to anyone. So those are some of the things that cause burnout, but they're not always necessarily sequential. There's, I think, times in our lives where stress is the most pressing. I think there's times in our life where we are on the cruise control and feeling stagnant. And then there's other times where we're feeling incredibly burnt out with what we're doing. But I have noticed that all three have been heightened exponentially over the past 2 years during this pandemic, that the levels of stress, stagnation, and burnout, they were already reaching all-time highs before the pandemic. And I think the pandemic just threw kerosene on the fire.
I agree. I want to level set here with something, because as you're talking about sustain your game, right? I want everyone to think of their lives for a moment. And I want you to also think of the engine of your car. Like no one in their right mind is going to show up to Valvoline or Jiffy Lube or whatever and be like, okay, sir, when was your last oil change? Oh, it was 47,000 miles ago. I figured I should come in because the engine light is on and it's overheating and it's smoking. I figured it was probably time to come in. We don't do that. Most of us don't go, we go to the dentist every 6 to 9 months. We don't go every 12 years and be like, my teeth were starting to rot out of my head. I figured it was time to come, right? But yet, for some crazy reason, and listen, I had to get this through my thick skull as well, because I thought, well, yeah, it makes sense not to be proactive with myself, but proactive everywhere else. But now, after doing this work for almost 8 years, I'm like, oh man, preventative maintenance to sustain your game, to sustain your engine, that's where it's at. Because if you wait until the overheat light comes on, the car engine's smoking, your engine's about to blow up, your transmission fell out, a mile back, it's probably too late and you've taken a serious beating. So as it relates to all of that, why do you think most people are not proactive and they don't believe in the preventative maintenance of just their overall mentality, their sanity, their stress, all these things?
I think our society confuses selfishness with selflessness. And I think many people unfortunately feel that if they're taking time for themselves to refill their bucket, whether that's going to the driving range to hit some golf balls, or that's sitting in a quiet room and reading a book, or that's going to take a CrossFit class, they feel like while they're doing those things, if they're not being of service to their spouse or to their children or to their colleagues and coworkers, that's been labeled being selfish. And selfishness has a very negative connotation in our society. I mean, nobody wants to raise their hand to say, yes, I'm inherently selfish. But what I found is when you do those things, you're actually not being selfish. You're being selfless because you're doing them in service of others. Being able to say to your spouse, if you can give me 30 minutes to just go hit some balls at the driving range, when I come back, I will be a better husband. I will be a better father. Like if you allow me to fill my bucket, I will be able to serve this family to a higher level. And then, of course, with that, we need to be able to be supportive of our spouses and significant others and say, hey, if you need to go do, whatever you need to go do to refill your bucket, I'll hold down the fort now. And then you'll come back and you'll be a better mother or whatever. And I think it's so important to model this for our children. I let my children know, when I get up in the morning and I'm going to go for a workout, that I do that because I want to feel my best, because I want to be the best dad to you. And I want to be the best keynote speaker. And I want to be the best business owner. These things don't happen by accident. They're very intentional. And that's something I model for my children and I talk to them all of the time. But I think that's where it started. And especially, in a newer marriage, and when you have younger children, and I remember these days because I was still married at that time, but I have twin toddlers and they're screaming and they need to be fed and we're up to our knees in diapers. The thought of saying, I need to step out and get away from this because I need to refill my bucket. I mean, the death stares I used to get, even, suggesting that, I can understand why people are hesitant. Now, that's something her and I have worked through, and we've come to the conclusion that was not the best approach or the healthiest approach at the time. But that's where I feel we confine ourselves almost to this self-imposed trap of thinking, I can't invest in myself because if I do, it's taking away from what I'm offering others. And I'm just here to say nothing could be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite. The more you invest in yourself, the more you'll be able to give others.
I want to get to the core of this. And I've been trying to get to the core of this with, myself. I mean, my own journey, right? Because like my wife will be like, why don't you go for a run? No, I'm fine. Yeah. No, you're not. If you go out for a run, or go for a workout, or you go meet up with your friends for coffee or something like that, like, you're going to come back better for us. I'm just letting you know. And sometimes I need that boot in the rear end for that. But let's get to the core of this.
Sure.
as far as the guilt that's associated with this and just overcoming that part of it. Because for most of us, that's where we can't get past, even though you're saying all these words, right? And all these ideas around to sustain your game, you have got to take care of yourself, right? But yet and a lot of us, we know this, and we know this at a very aware level. Yet sometimes because of guilt and shame, like we absolutely still won't do it. And that's a huge miss. It's a huge miss. And it's frustrating. Like I think life would be much easier if we allowed ourselves that grace and that time, but giving permission for it. And here's the other thing too, giving permission for it is one thing, but even when we feel it, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I'm really stressed. I'm really overwhelmed. You know what? Shut up. You know, just shove it down. Man up, toughen up, right? Just get through it. And then we just plow through it like a bulldozer, but we're actually doing more harm, but we don't think we are until you suddenly explode all over your 14-year-old that you left trash on the ground. Right. Right. So how do we do that?
It starts with the reframing, and it certainly, shame and guilt are two of the most toxic emotions that we feel as human beings. And I can't think of an occurrence. I never like to say never, very, careful with using absolutes, but I can't think of an occurrence where intentionally piling on guilt and shame make anything better. I mean, we have those feelings for a reason, but piling them on top only makes the situation worse. So part of it has to come through the reframing. Now, naturally, if you view your self-care as being selfish, as being, I'm doing this for me, I'm taking away from my spouse or my children, that's where the guilt and the shame can come in. If you can reframe that and look at this lens as me going for a 30-minute run will not only add to my energy level and my vitality and my longevity, because I want to be here for my kids for as long as I can be, but it's going to allow me to be a better father. I'm going to be more patient. I'm going to be more focused. I'm going to be more present. All of the things that come in this case with physical exercise, are the benefits. When you can reframe that, then it actually becomes the opposite. It becomes me not doing this is actually selfish. Me showing up to the dinner table tonight as anything less than my best self is being inherently selfish. I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of the NBA finals. It's 1-1 at present. Next game is going to be in Boston, game 3 on Wednesday night. And I can promise you, a couple hours before tip off, Stephen Curry is not walking around the streets of Boston wondering what he's going to eat for his pregame meal. He understands what he needs to do to show up to that game, to be his best self and to be the best player he can be. And if Stephen Curry does anything that doesn't allow him to show up as his best self, he gives the Warriors less of a chance to be successful. He gives the Warriors less of a chance to win. So if Stephen Curry does anything that is not allowing him to show up right before tip-off as his best self, that is actually an act of selfishness. And we need to look through that same lens. So anything Stephen Curry does before the game to get himself in the right, optimal physical, mental, and emotional state to play is not being selfish. He is doing it in service of his teammates, his coaches, and the entire Warriors organization. And that's how we need to look at the way we approach fatherhood, is saying that the only way I can be the best father I'm capable of is by filling my bucket first. And then once my bucket is full, then I can take that and I can let it overflow to those that I care most about. And when I'm doing that, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be present. I'm going to do everything I can to increase my connection with my children. And the only way you can do those things is if you're taking care of yourself. You very openly admitted with great, courage and vulnerability, you're lacking a little bit of sleep at present. Now, that was something outside of your control that interrupted your sleep. But even you recognize that if you allow not getting good sleep to continue to fester for days and weeks, that will erode your ability to have patience, to be present. Like that will take away. So going to sleep and getting quality sleep is in service of your family. And it's the same thing for working out, same thing for reading, same thing for having quality time with your wife. these things all add up and they all matter. And if you can reframe that to realize that you're not doing it inherently for yourself, you're doing it to be of more service to others, hopefully with enough conditioning and consistency, that will allow the guilt and the shame to dissipate.
I think that is so dead on. And I want guys to, I personally think, and I'm sure you've talked about this many, many times in the past. So excuse me for if I'm new to it, but if I'm really putting some pieces together here, as it relates to team performance, and you are a team, right? Your family is a team. And if you really think of it that way, right? If you're Kevin Durant, right? Or Steve Nash, and if you went out and got bomb drunk, the night before, like the final game, that is incredibly selfish, because now you're not bringing your A game to the team and you're hurting the team. So as a dad, right? If you are not taking that time, you are not serving the team, right? It's actually a disservice. Like, think of Kevin Durant or Steve Nash showing up, partying for 3 days straight in Vegas and then trying to play a basketball game. All his teammates be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, right. You have just hurt all of us. Thank you very much. What's wrong with you, man? Come on. And yet he'd be like, well, I still had to show up for the game, right? Not that he talks like that, but
that's a pretty good impression.
It's so funny, man. Just kind of a quick side note, family humor. Anytime, like, my kids, like, it's so funny. Like, one of our favorite quotes in this house is, I don't think I talk like that. Like, that's what we say, because my kids, especially my older ones, they're like, Dad, when you were talking to me, you're like, well, where you been? Like, where you been all night? Like, I haven't heard from you in like two hours. And I'm like, I don't think I talk like that. Like, so we kind of like laugh about it. And but one thing that I will say, and this is just a personal win that I've noticed. So I used to be like this early riser, right? At like 4 a.m. workout. And to be honest, like, I thought for years, like I did that for probably 2.5 years. I thought that really, really served me at a great level. Like, oh, I'm getting myself carrying like early. Right. And then it was back in January, my 14-year-old challenged me to doing a bodybuilding show with him. Ooh. Yeah. And how do you say no to that challenge? Now, truth be told, I didn't really care, about the outcome. Actually, the outcome was great. But I didn't care. I'm like, every day, one-on-one time in the gym with you. Yeah. Sign me up for that all day long. That would be amazing. Right. Especially because he's 14, that 80% rule. Right. But I switched up my routine to working out with him when he got home from school at 3:30 p.m. versus 4 a.m., which was the time I used to do. And one thing I can tell you is that by dinner time on most days, I would find myself exhausted. Right. And I'm like, oh, I've been hustling and grinding all day. But like by dinner time, I'm like, man, I feel pretty smoked right now. One thing I've noticed is a couple extra hours of sleep and having a space of like an hour to an hour and 20 minutes from the time I end my workday, which at the time was 3 p.m. and then working out with him from 3:30 to 5, I would come home like with my hair on fire, like feeling refreshed, feeling renewed, stress gone. Like it was that it's exactly what I needed in the middle of the day to finish. Hey, let's call it like what it is, right? A game, right? To finish the second half of the day. And it was that intermission. It was almost like, the coaches bring you back to the locker room. They give you that pump up, speech. And you're like, okay, cup is back to being full. I'm ready. I'm good to go again. But it's interesting that you say that, because I interviewed one other individual years ago. He's from New York, and I'm going to butcher his accent, but it was so funny. His name is Devin Bandison, and he wrote a book called Fatherhood is Leadership. And he's like, Larry, what really needs to happen is your cup needs to be so full, it actually has to overflow from the saucer. So, yeah, man, I'm definitely picking up what you're putting down.
I have a feeling that was a good impression for sure. Man, so much gold in what you just shared there. A few things I want to highlight. going back to what you said originally from this selfishness standpoint, one thing I learned very quickly through the sport of basketball being a team game is the first thing you can do to improve your team is improve yourself. And as the conditioning coach, I would say that to all of our players before they left for the summer and say, do you guys want our team to be better next year? And of course they would say, yes, coach, yes. Then you come back better. You come back in September, bigger, stronger, faster, and more skilled than you are today. And if each one of you does that, we will be better by default. But do your part. And it's the same thing. If we want to make a bigger contribution to our families, then we have to become more. We have to improve. So it always starts with that. And then this concept of filling your own bucket. First and foremost, I think it's important. I'm very big on the word intentional. I think we all need to be very intentional with how we choose to spend the bookends of our day, our morning and our evening routine. But intentional does not mean one size fits all. Intentional does not mean that there's such a thing as a perfect morning routine, because it varies for everybody. And I love the fact that you were open to switching what you were currently doing. You were getting up at 4 a.m. You found yourself being rather exhausted by the end of the day. Thankfully, your son gave you this opportunity to share some time with him and try something new, which forced you to switch your workout to the afternoon. And you really love the way that made you feel, in addition to having the quality time with him. I just want folks to know, you don't have to just see when someone says on social media that, if you're not up at 4 a.m. and you're not grinding, that you're not getting ahead. That's not true. Each of us can figure out the rhythm that works best for us and the schedule that works best for us. But what we absolutely need to do is get crystal clear on the things that do fill our bucket. Like, what are the things that give us energy, that make us feel alive, that make us feel like our hair is on fire, and that make us smile? And come up with a list of those things, and then figure out how you can integrate those things on the bookends of your day, part of your morning routine or part of your evening routine. And I only say bookends because for most people, the meat of the day is usually a little bit more restrictive because of work for most people that go to conventional jobs, and can be a little tougher to have control over. But we absolutely have more control over the morning and evening. The first 60 minutes after we wake up, and the last 60 minutes before we go to bed, and start to take some of those things and integrate them into your morning and evening routine. And when you do it on the bookends of the day, it will absolutely help you fill your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual bucket. It will give you more energy, and will give you more vitality and longevity in the long run. But you have to be very intentional about that. Every single person listening to this, I can promise you have a morning routine. The question is, did you design it with intention, or did you just walk backwards into it? Have you just created the habit of just waking up, checking your phone, overdosing on coffee, staring at social media, and then running out the door 5 minutes late so you feel stressed getting to work? Like, that is a routine, and it's one that you've allowed through default. You can change that whenever you want to change that. And I would highly encourage folks do that. And I'm always trying to tinker with timing and what I do and what I eat and how much I sleep until I can find that recipe for how I perform optimally. And it changes with age. Like, my morning routine now at 46 is vastly different than it was at 36 and 26, because I'm different. I've grown. I'm proud of the fact I'm not the same man I was 10 years ago. And I can promise you I won't be the same man 10 years from now at 56. And I'll most likely need to make some tweaks to what I'm doing then. So I love the fact that you took ownership of that. You tried something new, you increased some quality time with your son, and you found something that worked better for you at this stage in your life.
I appreciate that, man. And I love the bookends idea. So I'll hold up for those of you guys watching us on YouTube. This is what really catapults my day. So the Living Faith, it's a daily scripture read. My wife got me this right here, which is Daily Light for Men, which is 365 scriptures, scripture of the day, and then Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic. And then I'm just like throwing up book after book after book, and then I've got my journal. So then what I do is I take that information, and it usually only takes me, quite honestly, about 7 minutes to read all that, because they're all pretty short. But it gets me in that state of, okay, based on what I've read today, what have I learned? How can I go about my day? What are the daily goals? How can I journal some things out? And the thing is that I'll journal some things out, then reflect upon things that happened yesterday.
Love it.
Things that you're most grateful for. And like, literally I wrote down, like, okay, lesson learned, when I see trash on the floor, I'm going to ask my son nicely. I'm going to speak to him like a human being. Right. But, and those are the things, that mindfulness stuff, man, it's very, very powerful. I want to talk yeah, go ahead.
I was going to share one thing on that.
Yeah.
And I learned this from Coach K, the recently retired Hall of Fame coach at Duke. Coach K is big, and I've adopted this with my family, and I'm hoping you and your listeners find this helpful. Coach K chooses to have co-created standards for his program as opposed to a list of rules that he was created, and basically says, like, as a family, let's create some standards of excellence that we are all going to live up to. This is not me telling you follow these rules or you will be punished. Let's all co-create these standards. And I have a standard, and it just popped in my mind. I don't know why I didn't think of it originally when you were talking about picking up the trash. But one of our standards is we leave every place better than we found it. And I tell my kids, I don't care if you're somewhere for 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, or 5 years, you leave it better than you found it. So even if we're just walking to the grocery store and in the parking lot, I see an empty Gatorade bottle or a piece of trash on the ground, obviously none of us left it there, but we're capable of picking it up and throwing it away. And it takes you 2 seconds with minimal effort, and we're going to leave that better than we found it. Anyone that follows me on social knows I've got a pretty hard stance about returning shopping carts to the corral after you're finished shopping instead of abandoning them in an empty parking space. But it's for that exact reason. We want to leave this parking lot better than we found it. And that, when you have standards that are co-created, and everybody agrees to them, and everyone agrees to be held accountable to them, then they've got some skin in the game, and there's some buy-in. And then I can just look at my son who leaves trash somewhere and just say, hey, I noticed you left your trash on the coffee table. We leave places better than we found them, remember? And there's no question. They've got that buy-in. But equally important is my kids hold me to that same level of accountability. I mean, I'm a flawed human being. I make mistakes. I have lapses in judgment. I'm not going to pretend like I've never accidentally left trash somewhere. And they have the ability to call me out for that exact same thing. Because as a father, I want to model the behavior that I want my children to emulate. So if I want them to leave places better than they find it, then I have to make sure that I'm doing that. And I don't even make a big deal. If I see some trash on the ground when we're going to the grocery store, I don't make it this big life lesson. I just pick it up and I throw it away. But our kids are like sponges. They're always seeing what we're doing. And that seed has then been planted in their mind that our dad talks about leaving places better than he finds them. He just saw some trash. He threw it away. That's something that I want to aspire to do as well. So this mindset of let's create standards, and this is a code that we will all live up to. And anytime one of us does not live up to it, which is going to happen because we make mistakes, that we all as a family care enough to hold each other accountable to that. And I know for me, one of the big ones that I needed to improve on a few years ago was I was constantly tethered to my phone, and I was spending too much time on my phone when I should have been present with my children. I'm sitting with them physically, but I was not with them mentally or emotionally. And I realized it was something I needed to improve. So we made that one of our standards, that when we're going to be together, we're going to be present. And I told them, if you see me on my phone when I'm with you, you can tell me to put it away. Like you can hold me accountable. And boy, did they love doing that. They loved catching me on my phone and telling me to put it away. And I would smile and do so, and very much appreciated that. So it got them engaged and felt like they were co-creators and collaborators on these family standards. And it was no longer, I'm the dad, I'm in charge, I tell you, do what I say or you'll be punished, which I think is more of a construct that many of us grew up with. I mean, that was kind of parenting 20 to 30, 40 years ago. And I just think now we can actually create something a little bit more engaging.
I love that, man. I want to give one final thought, and then I want to make sure the audience can find everything that you're doing, go grab your book and connect with you. What you really talked about right there was we've had other parenting experts on the podcast. And what we have found is that, and we've known this for, for years, right? It's not being a dictator, and it's not because I told you so. And it's not because I said so. When you co-create an agreement and how we operate, then the agreement holds the clout, not because I said so. So if the agreement is we leave spaces better than when we leave spaces better than when we came in, Or the agreement is when we are together, we're not on our devices, and you feel free to call both parties out. Then it's the agreement that holds clout. It's not necessarily because I'm your parent because I said so. It's the agreement. So, and we both have to live to that. So I love that you mentioned that. I want to make sure as we wrap up here that all the guys can find you and connect with you if they would like. And obviously your book, Sustain Your Game. I would like my own copy signed in blood. Thank you. And I will go ahead and send you my address. No, I'm kidding. But where can guys find you?
I'd be happy to send you a signed copy. This has been a really fun conversation. I can't tell you how much I respect and revere the work you're doing and really appreciate the community you've created. Easiest place to find me is alansteinjr.com. I have a supplemental site, strongerteam.com as well. I do some one-on-one coaching. I've got the books, obviously. I've got a course, a podcast. So all the supplemental stuff is at strongerteam.com. And I'm very easily found on social media at Alan Stein Jr. If anything that we talked about struck a chord, if anyone wants to ask questions, share something on their end that might be helpful, or just keep the dialogue going, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm very good about getting back to folks. And very apropos to this conversation, a friend of mine and we wrote a very short self-published book. It's more of a guide. It's called The Sideline, Survival Guide for Youth Sports Parents. My kids are at the age now where they're heavily into sports. And because I've spent my entire life in sports, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of parenting just through the sporting lens. So we wrote this guide to hopefully help parents navigate that space and really add value to their child's sporting experience. Because there's a lot of room for growth in that area, as I've noticed, as I've been on the sidelines. And you can go to thesidelineBook.com for that. And then for Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game, they're sold anywhere books and audiobooks are sold. Most people choose Amazon or Audible. But yeah, I know that was a mouthful, but if there's anything I can do to continue to serve you or your audience, or I can help any father out there, that helps fill my bucket. I love lighting candles for other fathers because we're all in this together, and it would be a real pleasure. So thank you so much for this. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure, my man. Hey, real quick, just so you guys know, Alan's name is spelled with one L. So, and it's actually ALAN. So it's not spelled necessarily the traditional way, but not to worry. There's a lot of links that he shared in this in this particular show. You won't have to find it, or I'm sorry, you won't have to look very hard to find it. See, I am tired. All you have to do is go over to thedadedge.com/377. And hey, by the way, happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. That's what today is. Again, thedadedge.com/377. Alan, this was awesome, dude. Your energy is contagious, my friend, and I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise, I appreciate you.
Back at you. Gentlemen, go out, sustain your game, and live legendary. Take care.